Siona God, hello all. Oshasahia, good evening, and Wado. Thank you for watching. So this is day 18, part A of reading Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. Kelly Miller saw the controversy over differences in educational philosophy to be the work of quote-unquote one-eyed enthusiasts, rather than of men like Du Bois and Washington who saw the need for both. Booker T. Washington saw his own primary task as, end quotes, the promotion of progress among the many and not the special culture of the few, end quote. He saw his work as an educator and his times as preparatory, as quote unquote laying a foundation for the masses, but not to confine the whole race to the work for which Tuskegee Institute. I just finished supper. I didn't make it, so I just have to say. I ordered in as a like a special surprise for our son, and because of the holiday and everything, and it's kind of making me a little spitty. Anyway, immediately prepare its students. After speaking proudly of a Tuskegee graduate whose knowledge of chemistry had increased the acreage yield of sweet potatoes several-fold, he said, in quotes, "My theory of education for the Negro would not, for example, confine him for all time to farm work, to the production of the best and most sweet potatoes, but that, if he succeeded in this line of industry, he could lay the foundations upon which his children and grandchildren could grow to higher and more important things in life." End quote. Even in the present, he said, in quotes, "we need professional men and women," end quote. And he looked forward to a time when there would be more successful black, end quotes, lawyers, congressmen, and music teachers, end quote. As regards civil rights, okay, I don't know, that's kind of weird. Although Booker T. Washington wrote in 1899, in quotes, "I do not favor the Negroes giving up anything which is fundamental and which has been guaranteed to him by the Constitution of the United States," end quote. His general public posture was that he was too busy with the self-improvement of blacks to become involved in political controversies. Yet when his papers were examined after his death, it became clear that he had privately goaded other blacks to crusade for civil rights and had even secretly financed legal challenges to the Jim Crow laws in the South. Washington was fully aware that to have done these things publicly would have jeopardized the white financial support on which Tuskegee Institute depended. Nor was this simply a matter of protecting his own interest. He understood the repercussions for others if he made explosive statements in the volatile racial atmosphere of the times. End quotes, "I could stir up a race war in Alabama in 6 weeks if I chose," end quote. He said, but to do so, end quote, would wipe out the achievements of decades of labor, end quote. Yet he also understood that open challenges to racial discrimination had to be made. As he wrote to Oswald Garrison Villard, Villard, one of the founders of the NAACP, end quote, "there is work to be done which no one placed in my position can do," end quote. That is just, I didn't know that. Anyway, although Du Bois could not have known of all these things that Washington was doing secretly, he had an insight into the man himself and knew where his loyalties were. Du Bois said of Washington, end quotes, "he had no faith in white people, not the slightest," end quote. Booker T. Washington practiced what a later generation of black militants would only preach to advance the cause of blacks, end quote, "by all means necessary," end quote. A leading black educator of his time, Dean Kelly, Kelly Miller of Howard University, said of Washington that the advancement of the black race, end quotes, "is the chief burden of his soul," end quote. Despite differences between Du Bois and Washington and rivalries between their respective followers, this did not prevent civility between the two men themselves. In Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery, he wrote of a meeting arranged by some quote-unquote good ladies in Boston in 1899, where in addition to, end quotes, "an address by myself, Mr. Paul Lawrence Dunbar, Lawrence, read from his poems, and Dr. W.B. Du Bois read an original sketch," end quote. In 1903, Du Bois wrote a critical essay about Washington that has since been widely quoted. What has not been so widely known is that Du Bois's aunt chided him for that essay, explaining how his role and constraints were very different from those of Booker T. Washington, and expressing her hope that he would never write about a Tuskegee educator that way again. Decades later, recalling this conversation, Du Bois added, quote unquote, "and I never did." Black colleges. Although most black colleges began as institutions run by white administrators and staffed by white professors, pressures to change that began in the 19th century. There were, at that point, relatively few blacks with the education needed to take on these roles. There were even fewer opportunities for such people to find employment elsewhere. Moreover, there was a concern for the effect on the black students of being educated by whites, as one of the more militant black leaders said in 1885, and quotes, "The intellects of our young people are being educated at the expense of their manhood," end quote, because in their classrooms, end quote, they see only white professors, end quote, thereby reinforcing the superiority and inferiority stereotypes. Others, however, caution that, in quotes, "our youth have the right to the best possible training, and we should not allow a mistaken race pride to cause us to impose upon them inferior teachers." Absolutely, and that's end quote. Significantly, the parents of these students usually preferred the skills of white teachers to the symbolism of black representation. And I'm thinking about where this person said, "Our youth have the right to the best possible training, and we should not allow a mistaken race pride to cause us to impose upon them inferior teachers." Isn't that what happened with the DEA hires? Not trying to start anything. We're leading with logic, right? So don't let me lose you. But like, that's literally the point. I mean, the statistics are freaking there, dude. For example, like way back when, and I say way back when, but you know, probably like 20 years ago or so, I went out for the fire department. And this was during a time where they were discriminating. And I'm not being weird, I'm being dead serious. It was like a news thing and everything. And I mean, I scored in the 90s. Should have been able to move on to the next level, because that was the cutoff. You had to score in the 90s in order to move on to the next level. And come to find out, they weren't putting me through because I had passed everything else. And I had to do that big, huge test and everything. And they're like, "Yeah, maybe you're going to have to try again." Well, I mean, I took it twice, scored in the 90s both times. I was like, I guess it just ain't for me. I don't know. I guess these guys are like really super smart. And the person was literally cutting it at like, I don't know, you had to score 100 or a 99, which was insane. And so they were like rigging it. And I'm not really too sure why, because I don't know the percentage breakdowns as far as like, does that cut out minorities and females and stuff? Like, I'm not really too sure. But it was a big scandal, and they removed the person, and they told us that you can come back if you wanted to. And I was like, yeah, something smells funny. You know what I mean? So, but I'm glad I didn't go that route, because I would have never met my husband. I would never have had our son. So, yeah, I mean, things happen for a reason. But why would you lower the bar just to get more people in, right? To something, to anything. You know what I mean? If people weren't cutting it at the cutoff, why would you feel the need to bring people in that were, let's just say, at the top of their class, minority wise? So like, if you pit all the scores of, like, say, black people or whatever nationality, right? But really it was black people that they were doing this to, and say, okay, I'm going to take the best one out of that, right? Well, let's just say that you've got these, 95s and 100s, and now you've got, and I don't know, I'm just saying, now you've got these 80 to 85s. I don't want the 80 to 85 person cutting open my brain, right? If I had to have brain surgery or heart surgery. I had heart surgery. I don't want the 80 to 85 person. I want, the top of the class, right? hands down. you know. Anyways, but yes, this is the point. Why? Okay, I'll read it one last time, then we're moving on. Our youth have the right to the best possible training, and we should not allow a mistaken race pride to cause us to impose upon them inferior teachers. I mean, my lord. Significantly, the parents of these students usually preferred the skills of white teachers to the symbolism of black representation. I'm reading what's in here. The pool of qualified black scholars was small. Prior to the First World War, only 14 black Americans had ever received a PhD from a recognized American or European university. Nevertheless, with the passing years, the political pressures eventually won out, and colleges for black students began to be staffed increasingly by black professors and run by black administrators, whether or not these professors and administrators had sufficient training or ability. That's crazy. In 1926, half a century after its founding, Howard University had its first black president. A leading black scholar of a later era, E. Franklin Frazier, Frazier, wrote of this transition period as an educational setback. Oh, wow. And Dean Kelly Miller, who lived through that era at Howard University, called it, in quotes, a misfortune barely short of a calamity, end quote. Man, this was not just a misfortune for that era. Putting underqualified people in charge of black colleges and universities meant that the whole development of these institutions would be shaped or warped by department chairmen, deans, and college presidents whose priorities, including holding on to their jobs, made better qualified blacks who would emerge over time be seen as rivals to be repressed, rather than assets to be treasured. And the latter's more intellectual orientation is nothing to be encouraged. The first black president of Howard University, Mordecai, M-O-R-D-E-C-A-I-W Johnson, has been cited as a major obstacle to the research of internationally renowned black scientist Ernest Just, whose research grants from prestigious outside institutions were interfered with by Johnson. As late as 1971, decades after the transition to the black academic leadership, a study of black colleges concluded, in quotes, the administration is usually not interested in scholarly performance, though this kind of activity is tolerated, and the spoon-feeding method of teaching certainly does not call for it, end quote. The result was that, with a relative handful of exceptions among black institutions, end quote, the writing pens of members of these institutions have been virtually silent, end quote. The years in office of administrators at black colleges and universities tended to be some multiple of that of administrators in white institutions, given the black administrators' lack of viable alternatives in the larger society. Mordecai Johnson, for example, remained president of Howard University. What? Y'all. Mordecai Johnson, for example, remained president of Howard University for 34 years. The net result was that the influence of the initial generation of underqualified people lasted longer and shaped the enduring values and priorities that prevailed on black campuses. These values and priorities in turn shaped the kinds of people who would be groomed and selected to become their successors, perpetuating low academic standards, frivolous social activities among students, and indifference, incompetence, and corruption among the administration and faculty. Now, hang on a minute. I don't know about you, but I watched the Huxtables, right? The Cosby Show. And didn't Heathcliff graduate from Howard? Or I can't remember. I don't know. But I'm going to tell you, like, these places used to be like so, like, it was a big deal, you know? And I'm pretty sure it's still a big deal now. But like, this, like, okay, so like in the black community, to say that you went to an all black university or college or what have you, it was like the equivalent of saying that you went to Yale or Harvard or Stanford. Okay. Those were considered white schools. Fisk, Howard, and whatever else was all black schools, right? And they were like proud of it. So it just made me think, like, hold on, wait a minute. So like, are they still just having these people that aren't qualified? Oh my gosh. Like leading these, come on. No, they've got to have qualified people, right? Like, they're not gonna, come on. No. all that student debt just to be taught by somebody who's not qualified. I don't know. Because the place is run by non-qualified folks. I don't know. Can you make it make sense? Okay, so I just paused it to read this paragraph again. And okay, so I'm gonna reread it to you, and then I'm gonna ask you this question real quick. Okay. So it says, these values and priorities in turn shaped the kinds of people who would be groomed and selected to become their successors, perpetuating low academic standards, frivolous social activities among students, and indifference, incompetence, and corruption among the administration and faculty. Do you think, honestly, do you think that anybody will ever infiltrate these colleges, right? My hubster's eating. And my son's like, shh, I could hear him. Anyway. So I think he's probably eating too fast or had something go down the wrong pipe or whatever. But anyway, do you think that anybody will ever infiltrate the all-black colleges and universities and expose the incompetence, the corruption, and whatever else? You know what I mean? This is frivolous social activities among students. Well, we already know that happens in pretty much every college or university, I would think, with like the Greek clubs or whatever you call those things again, fraternities and sororities, because I know that like they have all of these like parties and what do you call that, charitable things that they do. And because they're like really bougie, they don't want to be caught wearing the same things and stuff, even though they're meeting people that have never seen them in the thing before. But I'm wondering if it's because they'll be photographed and potentially put in maybe like the school paper or something, or maybe their thing will make the like local paper news or something. I have no idea. But anyway, excuse me, I just know that they're not thrifty. Okay. But excuse me, that would be something, wouldn't it? If they went in there. And you know what would happen though, because of the way that society is now, they'll be like, oh, they're just doing that because they're black, right? Anyway, the transition from white to black leadership in black colleges was much more than a racial change. It was a major cultural change from a missionary generation of academic leaders bent on supplanting the existing black redneck culture with a transplanted culture representing very different values to new leaders. Oh my gosh, hang on a minute. Have you seen those videos that have gone around with people who are graduating from black colleges? And they are breaking it down. Like they're doing dances and things that should be actually done in some sort of a, well, I don't really know where you would do those. You know? I mean, they look like they're bumping and grinding, pumping and sweating as they're walking down to celebrate their fact that they're getting their diploma. And then when they get the diploma in hand, they're just like going crazy and all kinds of stuff. I feel like there's a time and a place, and that ain't it. You have to get in, get out. And because we've all been to graduations, you have to hurry it up because there's other people that are going to be graduating and stuff. It's not just for you. And even if it is for you, people have places to be, right? And go have your celebrations elsewhere, right? Anyway, Reddit culture with a transplanted culture representing very different values to new leaders, more accommodating to the black redneck culture in all its aspects, from academic laxity to sexual laxity, showiness, and corruption. In the words of E. Franklin Frazier, in quotes, the entire orientation and aim of higher education of Negroes was changing, end quote. Among these changes was that, in quotes, traditional standards of morals and manners, yeah, right, end quote, gave way among both students and their teachers. Students became far less interested in academic study than in such things as fraternities, sororities, and parties. Didn't I just say that? Good Lord. Partly this reflected a changing mix of students as colleges, black and white, drew on a broader social range after the Second World War, partly as a result of the availability of financial support from the GI Bill. So we'll leave it at that. Don't go hang, you, we need to till we meet again. Love you, mean it.